Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today, especially if you're the kind of person who geeks out over systems optimization. Today, we're staging an epic showdown between two absolutely fascinating operating systems, TahrPup and EasyOS Excalibur. Now, what makes this so incredibly cool is that both of these systems were born from the exact same philosophy, specifically the brilliant mind of developer Barry Collar. But they were built for completely different eras of computing. We're going to dig into the data, the architecture, and the real-world performance to see exactly what separates them. So here's the big question that really brings us all together. How exactly do you bring a decade-old PC back from the dead? I mean, if you've got an aging Core 2 Duo or maybe an old i5 system just sitting in a closet gathering dust, you know this struggle all too well. Modern operating systems are just entirely too heavy, right? They leave that old hardware completely choking. But throwing the computer away, that just feels like an absolute waste. Well, this is exactly where two contenders step in as the ultimate solutions to breathe new life into older hardware. They tackle the exact same problem, but as you'll see, their approaches literally couldn't be more different. To help us visualize this massive difference in design and feel right out of the gate, I want you to picture a race car. On one side, we have the classic TahrPup. Think of it like a Formula One car from the 1970s. It's tiny, it's raw, it's unbelievably light, and it is built purely for speed with absolutely zero modern comforts. On the other side, we have EasyOS Excalibur. This is your heavily optimized modern rally prototype. It carries a whole lot more tech and complexity on board because it has to handle rough modern terrain. Keep that imagery in the back of your mind as we break down the specifics. Okay, let's dive into this foundational philosophy. You can really see how they share that underlying DNA of running super efficiently in RAM, but they radically split in their core architecture. TahrPup is strictly from the classic Puppy era, built on an Ubuntu 14.04 base, and its main goal is just being a lightweight desktop. The complexity is super low, and its security model is, well, highly traditional. Now compare that to Excalibur. It belongs squarely to the modern era, based on Debian 6, and its goal isn't just to be a desktop. No, it's a fully containerized modern microdistribution. So the complexity jumps up to advanced, and the security completely shifts to an isolation and container-focused model. It's a huge leap. All right, part one, the lightweight speedster TahrPup. Focusing entirely on the raw, unadulterated speed of that classic era, TahrPup truly shines in a very specific hardware sweet spot. We're talking about your Core 2 Duos, your early Pentiums, old Athlons, and systems with maybe just 2 to 4 gigabytes of RAM. On this specific older hardware, TahrPup feels incredibly minimal and immediate. Clicking a menu or opening a native app, it feels almost instant to the user. It doesn't drag at all. It just absolutely flies. And this brilliantly illustrates why it's so incredibly fast. A typical idle RAM footprint for TahrPup is a tiny 150 to 300 megabytes. I mean, are you kidding me? In today's computing world, that is absurdly small. It leaves practically all of your system resources totally free for whatever actual tasks you're running. The background load is practically non-existent, and there are almost zero modern background services eating up your processor. But as with all tech, there's a trade-off, right? Yes, the desktop is lightning fast, and that's primarily because it relies on an older GTK software stack. You know, the underlying code that actually draws the windows and menus. But, and this is a massive but, modern browsers are the real pain point here. When you try to surf today's web on TahrPup, it is difficult and, honestly, pretty unstable. Why? Simply because the system belongs to another web era. GPU acceleration is problematic, newer codecs are completely missing, and modern TLS security protocols, the stuff keeping sites safe, can throw constant errors. Sure, you can technically run browsers, but watching YouTube or navigating complex modern web apps, it's a real struggle. Moving right along to part two, the heavy-duty prototype EasyOS Excalibur. So to actually tackle the demands of today's internet, Excalibur takes a totally different approach, and that results in a stark contrast in idle RAM. While TahrPup is barely sipping a maximum of about 300 megabytes, Excalibur can easily idle anywhere from 700 megs up to 1.5 gigabytes. This immediately tells us that Excalibur is a much heavier, modern microdistribution. It is carrying a lot more technology on board. It definitely feels heavier initially, it's more layered, and it's undeniably more complex right out of the box. Now, what's really interesting here is where that extra RAM is actually going. Barry Collar essentially evolved the system to handle modern application workloads right in the memory itself. So instead of just loading the OS, we're dealing with active containers keeping apps separated, plus ZRAM integration, which is actively compressing your memory on the fly so you can do more with less. Actually, it's a remarkably complex set of memory strategies operating totally behind the scenes. Which leads us to a really fascinating pivot. Yes, Excalibur feels much heavier at first glance compared to TahrPup, but once you apply RAM-first optimizations, specifically a really cool specialized community tuning script known as pip for M&K, the entire system transforms. It becomes shockingly fast because it handles memory so intelligently, things like browser multitasking, intense RAM workflows, large cache operations, and even media streaming become incredibly smooth. And yes, that's even on older hardware. Part 3. Under the hood, kernels, and security. To really understand these performance differences, we have to look at the kernel, the core engine of the system. TahrPup relies on older 3 or 4 series kernels. Now, these offer tiny overhead, but they absolutely struggle with newer hardware. Excalibur, on the other hand, runs on the modern 6 series kernels, which unlocks incredible modern hardware support and modern graphics drivers. But of course, that all comes at the cost of that slightly higher baseline overhead we just talked about. And what about the security philosophy? Literally night and day. TahrPup uses a very simple, very open, classic root desktop model. It's convenient, for sure, but definitely not ideal for today's threat landscape. Excalibur represents a major leap forward into modern security. It utilizes containers, deep app separation, and modern sandboxing ideas right at the core level. It's just a huge advantage for keeping your system safe while you're out there navigating the modern web. All right, part 4, the track test. i5 680 plus Iron Lake. Let's bring this out of theory and onto a real-world track test. Using an aging first-generation i5 processor, we can see exactly how this plays out. TahrPup is going to give you a lightning-fast desktop with ultra-responsive menus. Honestly, it wins the raw interface speed test, hands down. However, the second you try opening a modern website, you hit that weak web experience and the dreaded YouTube pain. Excalibur starts off feeling a bit complex on this same machine, but once properly tuned, it completely dominates. You get massively better web support, modern browser acceleration, and wildly superior RAM workflows. It's just flat out more future-proof. So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding what these systems were fundamentally built to achieve. This is the biggest conceptual difference and really our final verdict on their engineering goals. TahrPup was optimized for the Linux desktop itself, basically making the OS as light as physically possible. EasyOS Excalibur, though, is optimized for modern application workloads running in RAM. It specifically prioritizes the heavy lifting required by modern software while still leveraging those blazing fast memory speeds. And honestly, that leads to the magic feeling of Excalibur. TahrPup feels magical because of its nostalgic, almost unbelievable lightness. But Excalibur feels magical for the exact opposite reason. When you use it, you find yourself sitting there thinking, no way, it literally should not be this modern while still running mostly in RAM. It perfectly combines that old-school puppy speed philosophy with the harsh realities of modern Linux concepts and internet demands. Which brings our narrative perfectly full circle. If raw desktop speed is your only metric, TahrPup is still your 1970s F1 car. Tiny, raw, and incredibly light. But if you care about modern web usability, advanced RAM-first workflows, and true browser optimization potential, well, EasyOS Excalibur is your heavily optimized Rally prototype. It's heavier, it's definitely more complex, but once you tune it correctly, it is capable of so much more. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Which machine is right for your garage? Are you looking for the pure, unadulterated speed of a classic era just to run local files? Or are you ready to tune a modern, containerized engine to tackle today's internet on yesterday's hardware? I highly encourage you to boot up your old systems, experiment with both of these incredible philosophies, and dive deeper into the world of Linux optimization. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, and happy tweaking.